Essay 1 of Conduct of Life. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Daniel Christopher June. Conduct of Life by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Essay 1. Fate.
Delicate omens trace in air to the lone bard true witness bear. Birds and auguries on their wing chanted undeceiving things, him to beckon, him to warn. Well might then the poet scorn to learn of scribe or courier, hints writ in vaster character, on his mind at dawn of day soft shadows of the evening lay. For the provision is allied unto the thing so signified, or say, the foresight that awaits is the same genius that creates. It chanced during one winter, a few years ago, that our cities were bent on discussing the theory of the age. By an odd coincidence, 4 or 5 noted men were each reading a discourse to the citizens of Boston or New York on the spirit of the times. It so happened that the subject had the same prominence in some remarkable pamphlets and journals issued in London of the same season. To me, however, the question of the time resolved itself into a practical question of the conduct of life. How shall I live? We are incompetent to solve the times. Our geometry cannot span the huge orbits of the prevailing ideas, behold the return, and reconcile their opposition. We can only obey our own polarity. 'Tis fine for us to speculate and elect our course, if we must accept an irresistible dictation. In our first steps to gain our wishes, we come upon immovable limitations. We are fired with the hope to reform men. After many experiments, we find we must begin earlier, at school. But the boys and girls are not docile. We can make nothing of them. We decide that they are not of good stock. We must begin our reform earlier still, at generation. That is to say, there is fate, or laws of the world. But if there be irresistible dictation, this dictation understands itself. If we must accept fate, we are not less compelled to affirm liberty, the significance of the individual, grandeur of duty, the power of character. This is true, and that other is true. But our geometry cannot span these extreme points and reconcile them. What to do? By obeying each thought frankly, by harping, or if you will, pounding on each string, we learn at last its power. With the same obedience to other thoughts, we learn theirs, and then comes some reasonable hope of harmonizing them. We are sure that, though we know not how, necessity does comport with liberty, the individual with the world, my polarity with the spirit of the times. The rule of the age has for each a private solution. If one would study his own time, it must be by this method of taking up in turn each of the leading topics which belong to our scheme of human life, and by firmly stating all that is agreeable to experience on one, and doing the same justice to the opposing facts in the others, the true limitations will appear. Any excess of emphasis on one part will be corrected, and a just balance will be made. But let us honestly state the facts. Our America has a bad name for superficialness. Great men, great nations, have not been boasters and buffoons, but perceivers of the terror of life, and have manned themselves to face it. The Spartan, embodying his religion in his country, dies before its majesty without a question. The Turk, who believes his doom is written on the iron leaf from the moment when he entered the world, rushes on the enemy's saber with undivided will. The Turk, the Arab, the Persian, accepts the foreordained fate. On 2 days it says not to run from thy grave, the appointed and the unappointed day. On the first neither balm nor physician can save, nor thee on the second the universe slay. The Hindu under the wheel is as firm. Our Calvinists in the last generation had something of the same dignity. They felt that the weight of the universe held them down to their place. What could they do? Wise men feel that there is something which cannot be talked or voted away, a strap or belt which girds the world. The destiny, minister general, that executeth in the world o'er all, the purveyance which God hath seen beforn, so strong it is, that though the world had sworn the contrary of a thing be yea or nay, yet sometimes it shall fallen on a day, that falleth not often 1,000 years, for certainty our appetites here, be it of war, peace, or hate or love, all this is ruled by the sight above. Chaucer, The Knight's Tale. The Greek tragedy expressed the same sense. Whatever is fated, that will take place. The great, immense mind of Jove is not to be transgressed. Savages cling to a local god of one tribe or town. The broad ethics of Jesus were quickly narrowed to village theologies, which preach an election or favoritism. And now and then an amiable person, like Jung Stilling, Robert Huntington, believe in a Epicurean providence, which, whenever the good man wants a dinner, makes it somebody shall knock at his door and leave a $50. But nature is no sentimentalist, does not cosset or pamper us. We must see that the world is rough and surly, and will not mind drowning a man or woman, but swallows your ship like a grain of dust. The cold, inconsiderate of persons, tingles your blood, benumbs your feet, freezes a man like an apple. The diseases, the elements, fortune, gravity, lightning respect no persons. The way of providence is a little rude. The habits of snake and spider, the snap of tiger and other leapers and bloody jumpers, the crackle of the bones of his prey and the coil of the anaconda, these are in the system, and our habits are like theirs. We have just dined, and however scrupulously the slaughterhouse is concealed in that graceful distance of miles, there is complicity, expensive races, race living at the expense of race. The planet is liable to shocks from comets, perturbations from planets, rendings from earthquakes and volcanoes, alterations of climate, processions of equinoxes. Rivers dry up by opening up of the forest. The sea changes its bed. Towns and counties fall into it. At Lisbon, an earthquake killed men like flies. At Naples, 3 years ago, 10,000 persons were crushed in a few minutes. The scurvy at sea, the sword, the climate in the west of Africa, at Cayenne, at Panama, at New York, cut off men like a massacre. Our western prairies shake with fever and ague. The cholera, the smallpox, have proved as mortal to some tribes as the frost to the crickets, which, having filled the summer with noise, are silenced by the fall of the temperature of one night. Without uncovering what does not belong to us, or counting how many species of parasites hang on a bamboos, or groping after intestinal parasites, or infusory biters, or the obscurities of alternate generations, the form of the shark, the Belabras, the jaw of the sea-wolf, paved with crushing teeth, the weapons of the grampus, and the warriors hidden in the sea, are hints of the ferocity in the interiors of nature. Let us not deny it up and down. Providence is a wild, rough, incalculable road to its end. It is of no use to try to whitewash its huge mixed instrumentalities, or to dress it up with that terrific benefactor of a clean shirt and white neckcloth of a student in divinity. Will you say the disasters which threaten mankind are exceptional, and one need not lay his account for cataclysm every day? Aye, but what happens once may happen again, and so long as these strokes are not to be parried, they must be feared. But these shocks and ruins are less destructive to us than the stealthy power of other laws which act on us daily. And expensive ends to means is fate, organization tyrannizing over character. Menagerie, or forms and powers of the spine, is a book of fate. The bill of the bird, the skull of the snake, determines tyrannically its limits. So is the scale of races, of temperaments, so is sex, so is climate, so is the reaction of talent prisoning the vital force in certain directions. Every spirit makes its house, but afterwards the house confines the spirit. The gross lines are legible to the dull. The cabman is phrenologist so far. He looks on your face to see if his shilling is sure. A dome of brow denotes one thing, a pot belly another. A squint, a pug nose, mats of hair, the pigments of the epidermis betray character. People seem sheathed in their tough organization. Ask Rosaine, ask the doctors, ask Quetelet if temperaments decide nothing. If there be anything they do not decide, read the description in medical books of the four temperaments, and you will think you are reading your own thoughts which you had not yet told. Find the part which black eyes, which blue eyes play severally in the company. How shall a man escape from his ancestors, or draw from his veins the black drop which he drew from his father's or his mother's life? It often appears in a family, as if all the qualities of the progenitors were potted in several jars, some ruling qualities in each son or daughter in the house, and sometimes the unmixed temperament, the rank unmitigated elixir, the family vice, is drawn off in a separate individual, the others are proportionally relieved. We sometimes see a change of expression in our companion, and say, his father or his mother comes to the window of his eyes, and sometimes a remote relative. In different hours, a man represents each of several of his ancestors, as if there were 7 or 8 of us rolled up in a man's skin. 7 or 8 ancestors at least, and they constitute the variety of notes on which the new piece of music which his life is. At the corner of the street, you read the possibility of the passenger in the facial angle and the complexion, in the depth of his eye. His parentage determines it. Men are what their mothers made them. You may as well ask a loom which weaves huckabuck why it does not make cashmere, or expect poetry from this engineer, or a chemical discovery from that jobber. Ask the digger in the ditch to explain Newton's law. The fine organs of his brain have been pinched by overwork and squalid poverty from father to son for hundreds of years. When each comes forth from his mother's womb, the gate of gifts closes behind him. Let him value his hands and feet, he has but one pair. But he has but one future, and that is already determined in his lobes. It describes in that little fatty face, pig eye, and squat form. All the privilege and all the legislation of the world cannot meddle or help to make a poet or a prince of him. Jesus said, when he looketh on her, he hath committed adultery. But he is an adulterer before he has yet looked on the woman, by the superfluity of the animal and the defect of the thought in his constitution. Who meets him or who meets her in the street sees that they are ripe for each other's victim. In certain men, digestion and sex absorb the vital force, and the stronger these are, the individual is so much weaker. The more of these drones perish, the better for the hive. If later they gave birth to some superior individual with force enough to add to his animal a new aim and a complete apparatus to work it out, all the ancestors are gladly forgotten. Most men and women are merely one couple more. Now and then one is a new cell or camarilla open in his brain, an architectural, musical, or philological knack, some stray taste or talent for flowers or chemistry or pigments or storytelling, a good hand for drawing, a good foot for dancing, an athletic frame for wide journeying, etc., which skill nowise alters rank in the scale of nature, but serves to pass the time. The life of sensation goes on as before. At last, these hints and tendencies are fixed in one, or in a succession. Each absorbs so much food and force as to become itself a new center. The new talent draws off so rapidly the vital force that not enough remains for the animal functions, hardly enough for health, so that in the second generation, if the like genius appears, the health is visibly deteriorated, and the generative force impaired. People are born with a moral or with a material bias, uterine brothers with a diverging destination. I suppose with high magnifiers, the Fraunhofer or carpenter might come to distinguish in the embryo of the fourth day, this is a Whig, that a free soiler. It was a poetic attempt to lift this mountain of fate, to reconcile this despotism of race and liberty, which led the Hindus to say, fate is nothing but the deeds committed in the prior state of existence. I find the coincidence of the extremes of Eastern and Western speculation in the daring statement of Schelling. There is in every man a certain feeling that he has been what he is from all eternity, and by no means from such in time. To say it less sublimely, the history of the individual is always an account of his condition, and he knows himself to be party to his estate. A good deal of our politics is physiological. Now and then a man of wealth in the heyday of youth adopts the tenet of broadest freedom. In England, there is always some man of wealth and large connection planting himself during all his years of health on the side of progress, who as soon as he begins to die, checks his forward play, calls in his troops, and becomes conservative. All conservatives are such from personal defects. They have been effeminated by position or nature, born halt and blind, the luxury of their parents, and can only, like invalids, act on the defensive. But strong natures, backwoodsmen, New Hampshire giants, Napoleons, Burkes, Browns, Websters, Kossuths, are inevitable patriots until their life ebbs and their defects in gout, palsy, and money warp them. The strongest idea incarnates itself in majorities and nations, in the healthiest and strongest. Probably the election goes by a vorpidus weight, and if you could weigh bodily the tonnage of any 100 of the Whigs and Democratic party in a town, on the Dearborn balance, as they pass the hay scales, you could predict with certainty which party would carry it. On the whole, it would be rather the speediest way of deciding the vote, to put the selectmen or the mayor and aldermen on the hay scales. In science, we have to consider two things, power and circumstance. All we know of the egg, from each successive discovery, is another vesicle. And if after 500 years you got a better observer, or a better glass, he finds within the last observer another. In vegetable and animal tissues it is just alike, and all that the primary power of spasm operates is still vesicle. Yes, but the tyrannical circumstance, a vesicle and a new circumstance, a vesicle lodged in darkness, oaken thought becomes animal. In light, a plant. Lodged in the parent animal, it suffers changes, which ends in unsheathing miraculous capability in the unaltered vesicle, and unlocks itself to fish, bird, quadruped, head and foot, eye and claw. The circumstance is nature. Nature is what you may do. There is much you may not. We have two things, the circumstance and life. Once we thought positive power was all. Now we learn that negative power or circumstance is half. Nature is the tyrannous circumstance, the thick skull, the sheath snake, the ponderous, rock-like jaw, necessitated activity, violent direction, the conditions of a tool, like the locomotive, strong enough on its track, but which can do nothing but mischief off of it, or skates, which are wings on the ice but fetters on the ground. The book of nature is the book of fate. She turns the gigantic pages, leaf after leaf, never returning one. One leaf she lays down, a floor of granite, then 1,000 ages in a bed of slate, 1,000 ages in a measure of coal, 1,000 ages in a layer of marl and mud. Vegetable forms appear, her first misshapen animal, zoophyte, trilobite, fish, then Sauron's rude forms, in which she has only blocked her future statute, concealing under these unwieldy monsters the fine type of her coming king. The face of the planet cools and dries, the races meliorate, the man is born, and when the race has lived its term, it comes no more again. The population of the world is a conditional population, not the best, but the best that could live now. The scales of tribes, and the steadiness with which victory adheres to one tribe and defeat to another, is as uniform as the superposition of strata. We know in history that weight belongs to race. We see the English, French, and Germans planting themselves on every shore and market of America and Australia, monopolizing the commerce of these countries. We like the nervous and victorious habit of our own branch of the family. We follow the step of the Jew, of the Indian, of the Negro. We see how much will still be expended to extinguish the Jew, in vain. Look at the impalatable conclusions of Knox in his Fragment of Races. A rash and satisfactory writer, but charged with pungent and forgettable truths. Nature respects race, not hybrids. Every race has its own habitat. Detach a colony from its race and it deteriorates to the crab. See the shades of the picture. The German and Irish millions, like the Negro, have a great deal of guano in their destiny. They ferried over the Atlantic and carted all over America to ditch and drudge, to make corn cheap, and then to lie prematurely to make a spot of green grass on the prairie. One more faggot of these adamantine bandages is the new science of statistics. It is a rule that the most casual and extraordinary events, if the basis of population is broad enough, become matter of fixed calculation. It would not be safe to say that a captain like Bonaparte, a singer like Jenny Lind, or a navigator like Bodworth would be born in Boston. But, on a population of 20 or 200 millions, something like accuracy may be had. 'Tis frivolous to fix pedantically the date of particular inventions. They have all been invented over and over 50 times. Man is the arc machine, of which all these shifts draw from himself are toy models. He helps himself on each emergency by copying or duplicating his structure, just so far as the need is. 'Tis hard to find the right Homer, Zoroaster, and Manu. Harder still to find the Tubal Cain, or Vulcan, or Cadmus, or Copernicus, or Fust, or Fulton, the indisputable inventor. There are scores and centuries of them. They are as full of men. This kind of talent so abounds, this constructive tool-making efficiency, as if it adhered to the chemic atoms, as if the air he breathes were of Vaucansons, Franklins, and Watts. Doubtless in every million there would be an astronomer, a mathematician, a comic poet, a mystic. No one can read the history of astronomy without perceiving that Copernicus, Newton, Laplace are not new men, or a new kind of men, but that Thales, Anaximenes, Hipparchus, Empedocles, Aristarchus, Pythagoras, and Napides had anticipated them. Each had the same geometrical mind, apt for the same vigorous computational logic, a mind parallel to the movement of the world. The Roman mile probably rested on a measure of a degree of the meridian. Mahatman and Chinese know of the leap year, the Gregorian calendar, of the precession of equinoxes. As in every barrel of cowries brought to New Bedford there shall be one orangia, so there will be in a dozen millions of Malays and Mahatmans 1 or 2 astronomical skulls. In large city the most casual things, the things whose beauty lie in their casualty, are produced as punctually and to order as the baker's muffin for breakfast. Punch makes exactly 1 capital joke a week, and the journals contrive to furnish 1 good piece of news every day. Not less work the laws of repression, the penalties of violated functions. Famine, typhus, frost, war, suicide, effete races must be reckoned calculable parts of the system of the world. These are pebbles from the mountain, hints of the terms by which our life is walled up, and which show a kind of mechanical exactness, or a loom or mill, in which we call casual or fortuitous events. The force with which we resist these torrents of tendency looks so ridiculously inadequate that it amounts to little more than the criticism or protest made of a minority of one under compulsions of millions. I seemed, in the height of a tempest, to see men overboard struggling in the waves, and driven about here and there. They glanced intelligently at each other, but 'twas little they could do for one another. 'Twas much if they could keep afloat alone. Well, they had a right to their eye-beams, and all the rest was fate. I cannot trifle with this reality that's cropping out in our planted gardens in the core of the world. No picture of life can have any veracity that does not admit the odious facts. A man's power is hooped in by necessity, which by many experiments he touches on every side until he learns his arc. The element running through entire nature, which we popularly call fate, is known to us as limitation. Whatever limits us, we call fate. If we are brute and barbarous, the fate takes a brute and dreadful shape. As we refine, our checks become finer. If we rise to spiritual culture, the antagonism takes a spiritual form. In the Hindu fables, Vishnu follows Maya through all her ascending changes, from insect to crawfish, up to elephant. Whatever form she took, he took the male form of the kind, until she became at last woman and goddess, and he a man and god. The limitations refine as the soul purifies, but the ring of necessity is always perched at the top. When the gods in the Norse heaven were unable to bind the Fenris wolf with steel or with weight of mountains, the one he snapped and the other he spurned with his heel, they put on his foot a limp band softer than silk or cobweb, and this held him. The more he spurned it, the stiffer it grew. So soft and so staunch is the ring of fate. Neither brandy nor nectar, nor sulphuric ether, nor hellfire, nor ichor, nor poetry, nor genius can get rid of this limp band. For if we give it the high sense in which the poets use it, even thought is itself not above fate. That too must act according to eternal laws, and all that is woeful and fantastic in it is in opposition to its fundamental essence. And, last of all, high over thought, in the world of morals, fate is vindicator. leveling the high, lifting the low, of requiring justice in man, and always striking soon or late when justice is not done. What is useful will last, what is hurtful will sink. The doer must suffer, said the Greeks. It would soothe the deity not to be soothed. God himself cannot procure good for the wicked, said the Welsh triad. God may consent, but only for a time, said the Bard of Spain. Limitation is impassable by any insight of man. In his last and loftiest ascensions, insight itself, and the freedom of the will, is one of its obedience members, but we must not run into generalizations too large, but show the natural bounds of our essential distinctions, and seek to do justice to the other elements as well. Thus we trace fate in matter, mind, and morals, in race and retardations of strata, and in thought and character as well. It is everywhere bound or limitation, but fate has its lord, limitation its limits, is different seen from above and from below, from within and from without. For though fate is immense, so is power, which is the other fact in the dual world, immense. If fate follows the limits power, power attempts and antagonizes fate. We must respect fate as natural history, but there's more than natural history. For who and what is this criticism that pries into the matter? Man is not order of nature, sack and sack, belly and members, link and a chain, nor any ignominious baggage, but a stupendous antagonism, a dragging together the poles of the universe. He betrays the relation to what is below him, thick-skulled, small-brained, fishy, quadrumanous, quadruped ill-disguised, hardly escaped into biped, and has paid for the new powers by loss of some of the old ones. The lightning which explodes and fashions planets, maker of planets and suns, is in him. On one side, elemental order, sandstone, granite, rock ledges, peat bog, forest, sea and shore. On the other part, thought, the spirit which composes and decomposes nature. Here they are, side by side, God and devil, mind and matter, king and conspirator, belt and spasm, riding peacefully together in the eye and brain of every man. Nor can he blink the free will. To hazard the contradiction, freedom is necessary. If you please to plant yourself on the side of fate and say, fate is all, then we say, part of fate is the freedom of man. Forever wells up the impulse to choosing and acting in the soul. Intellect annuls fate. So far as a man thinks, he is free. And though nothing is more disgusting than the crowing about liberty by slaves, as most men are, and the flippant mistaking for freedom of some paper preamble like the Declaration of Independence, or the statute right to vote, by those who have never dared to think or to act, it is wholesome to man to look not at fate, but at the other way. The practical view is the other. His sound relation to these facts is to use and command, not to cringe to them. Look not on nature, for her name is fatal, said the oracle. Too much contemplation on these limits induces meanness. They who talk much of destiny, their birth stars, etc., are in a lower dangerous plane, and invite the evils they fear. I cited the instinctive and heroic races as proud believers in destiny. They conspire with it. A loving resignation is with the event. The dogma makes a different impression when it is held by the weak and lazy. 'Tis weak and vicious people who cast the blame on fate. The right use of fate is to bring up our conduct to the loftiness of nature. Rude and invincible except by themselves are the elements. So let man be. Let him empty his breast of his windy conceits, and show his lordship by manners and deeds on the scale of nature. Let him hold his purpose as with a tug of gravitation. No power, no persuasion, no bribe shall make him give up his point. A man ought to compare advantageously with a river, an oak, or a mountain. He should not have not less the flow, the expansion, the resistance of these. 'Tis the best use of fate to teach a fatal courage. Go face the fire at sea, or the cholera in your friend's house, or the burglar in your own, or what danger lies in the way of duty, knowing you are guarded by the cherubim of destiny. If you believe in fate to your harm, believe it at least for your good. For if fate is so prevailing, man also is part of it, and can confront fate with fate. If the universe have these savage accidents, our atoms are as savage in resistance. We should be crushed by the atmosphere, but for the reaction of the air within our body. A tube made of a film of glass can resist the shock of the ocean, if filled with the same water. If there be omnipotence in the stroke, there is omnipotence of recoil. 1. But fate against fate is only parrying defense. There are also the noble creative forces. The revelation of thought takes man out of servitude into freedom. We rarely say of ourselves, we are born, and afterwards, we are born again, and many times. We have successful experiences so important that the new forgets the old, and hence the mythology of the 7 or 9 heavens. The day of days, the great day of the feast of life, is that in which the inward eye opens the unity in things, the omnipresence of laws. Sees that what is must be, and ought to be, or is the best. The beatitude dips from on high down on us, and we see, is not in us so much as we are in it. If the air come to our lungs, we breathe and live. If not, we die. If the light comes to our eyes, we see, else not. And if truth come to our mind, we suddenly expand to its dimensions, as if we grew to worlds. We are as lawgivers, we speak for nature, we prophesy and divine. This insight throws us on the party interests of the universe, against all and sundry, against ourselves as much as others. A man speaking from insights affirms of himself what is true of the mind. Seeing its immortality, he says, I am immortal. Seeing its invincibility, he says, I am strong. It is not in us, but we are in it. It is not of the maker, not of what is made. All things are touched and changed by it. This uses and is not used. It distances those who share it from those who share it not. Those who share it not are flocks and herds. It dates from itself, not from former men or better men, gospel or constitution or college or custom. Where it shines, nature is no longer intrusive, but all things make a musical or pictorial impression. The world of men shows like a comedy without laughter. Populations, interests, governments, history, it is all toy figures in a toy house. It does not overvalue particular truths. We hear eagerly every thought and word quoted by an intellectual man, but in his presence our own mind is roused to activity, and we forget very fast what he says, much more interested in the new play of our own thought than any thought of his. 'Tis the majesty into which we have suddenly mounted, the impersonality, the scorn of egotisms, the sphere of laws that engage us. Once we were stepping a little this way and a little that way. Now we are as men in a balloon, and do not think so much of the point we had left, or the point we would make, as of the liberty and glory of the way. Just as much intellect as you add, so much organic power. He who sees through the design presides over it, and must will that which must be. We seek and rule, and though we sleep, our dream will come to pass. Our thought, though it were an hour old, affirms an oldest necessity, not to be separated from thought, not to be surpassed, and not to be separated from will. They must always have coexisted. It prizes us of its sovereignty and Godhead, which refuses to be severed from it. It is not mine or thine, but the will of all mind. It is poured into the souls of all men, as the soul itself which constitutes them men. I know not whether there be, as is alleged, in the upper region of our atmosphere, a permanent westerly current, which carries all its atoms which rise to that height. But I see that when a soul reaches a certain clearness of perception, they accept a knowledge and motive above selfishness. A breath of will breathes eternally through the universe of souls in the direction of right and necessary. It is the air which all intellects inhale and exhale. It is the wind which blows the worlds into orbit and orbit. Thought dissolves the material universe by carrying the mind up into a sphere where all is plastic. Of two men, each obeying his own thought, he whose thought is deepest will be the stronger character. Always one man more than another represents the will of divine providence to the period. 2. If thoughts make free, so does the moral sentiment. The mixtures of spiritual chemistry refuse to be analyzed. Yet we can see that the perception of truth is joined to the desire that it shall prevail. That affection is essential to will. Moreover, when a strong will appears, it usually results from a certain unity of organization, as if the whole energy of the body and mind flowed in one direction. All great force is real and elemental. There is no manufacturing a strong will. There must be a pound to balance a pound. Where power is shown in the will, it must rest on the universal force. Alaric and Bonaparte must believe they rest on a truth, or they cannot be bought or bent. There is a bribe and possibility for any finite will. But the pure sympathy with universal ends is an infinite force and cannot be bribed or bent. Whoever has had experience in the moral sentiment cannot choose but believe its unlimited power. Each pulse from that heart is an oath from the Most High. I know not the world's sublime means if it is not intimations of this infinite of a terrific force. A text of heroism, a name and an anecdote of courage are not arguments but sallies of freedom. One of these is the verse of the Persian Hafiz. "'Tis written on the gate of heaven, woe unto him who suffers himself to be betrayed by fate." Does the reading of history make us fatalists? What courage does not the opposite opinion show? A little whim of will be free gallantly contending against the universe of chemistry. But insight is not will, nor is affection will. Perception is cold, and goodness dies in wishes. As Voltaire says, 'tis the misfortune of worthy people that they are cowards. There must be a fusion of these two to generate the energy of will. There can be no deriving force except through the conversion of man into his will, making him the will, and the will him. One may say boldly that no man has the right to perception of any truth who has not been reacted on by it, so as to be ready to be its martyr. The one serious and formidable thing in nature is a will. Society is servile for want of will, and therefore the world wants saviors and religions. One way is right to go, the hero sees it, and moves down that aim, and that the world under him for root and support. He is to others as the world, his approbation is honor, his dissent infamy. The glance of his eye has the force of sunbeams. A personal influence towers up in memory and only worthy, and we gladly forget numbers, money, climate, gravitation, and the rest of fate. We cannot afford to allow the limitation if we know it is the meter of the growing man. We stand against fate, as children stand against the wall in their father's house, and notch their height from year to year. When the boy grows to man and is master of the house, he pulls down that wall and builds a newer and bigger. It is only a question of time. Every great youth is in training to ride and rule his dragon. His science is to make weapons and wings of these passions and retarding forces. Now, whether seeing these two things, fate and power, we are permitted to believe in unity? The bulk of mankind believe in two gods. They under one dominion here in the house, as friend and parent, in social circles, in letters, in art and love, and religion. But in mechanics, in dealing with steam and climate, in trade, in politics, they think they come under another, and that it would be practical blunder to transfer the methods of ways of working of one sphere to the other. What good, honest, generous men at home will be wolves and foxes on change? What pious men in the parlor will vote for reprobates at the polls? To a certain point, they believe themselves in the care of Providence, but in a steamboat, in an epidemic, in war, they believe a malignant energy rules. But relation and connection are not somewhere and sometimes, but everywhere and always. The divine order does not stop where sight stops. The friendly powers work on the same rules, on the same farm, on the next planet. But where they have not experienced, they run against it and hurt themselves. Fate, then, is the name for facts not yet passed under the fire of thought, for causes which are unpenetrated. But every jet of chaos which threatens to exterminate us is convertible by intellect into wholesome force. Fate is unpenetrated causes. The water-drowned ship and sailor are like a grain of dust. But learn to swim, trim your bark, and the wave which drowned it will be cloven by it and carry it like its own foam, a plume and a power. The cold is inconsiderate of persons, tingles your blood, freezes a man like a dewdrop. But learn to skate, and the ice will give you a graceful, sweet, and poetic motion. The cold will brace your limbs and brain to genius, and make you foremost men of time. Cold and sea will train an imperial Saxon race, where nature cannot bear to lose, and after cooping it up for thousands of years yonder England gives 100 Englands, 100 Mexicos. All the bloods it shall absorb and domineer, and more than Mexicos, the secret of water and steam, the spasm of electricity, the ductility of metals, the chariot of the air, the ruddered balloon are waiting for you. The annual slaughter from typhus far exceeds that of war, but right drainage destroys typhus. The plagues in the sea service from scurvy is healed by lemon juice and other diets portable and procurable. Depopulation by cholera and smallpox is ended by drainage and vaccination, and every other pest is not less in the chain of cause and effect, and may be fought off. And whilst arts draw out the venom, it commonly extorts some benefit from the vanquished enemy. The mischievous torrent is taught to drudge for man, the wild beast he makes for useful food or dress or labor. The chemic explosions are controlled like his watch. They are now the steeds which he rides. Man moves on all modes, by legs of horses, by wings of wind, by steam, by gas of balloon, by electricity, and stands on tiptoe, threatening to hunt the eagle in his own element. There is nothing he will not make his own carrier. Steam was, till the other day, the devil which he dreaded. Every pot made by a human potter or brazier was a hole in its cover, to let out the enemy, lest he should lift pot and roof, and carry the house away. But the Marquis of Walchester, Watt, and Fulton bethought themselves that where was power was not devil, but was God, that it must be availed of, and not by any means let off and wasted. Could he lift pot and roof and houses so handily? He was the workman we were in search for. He would be used to lift away, chain, and compel other devils, far more reluctant and dangerous, namely, cubic miles of earth, mountains, weight of resistance of water, machinery, and the labors of all men in the world. In time he shall lengthen and shorten space. It has not fared much otherwise with higher kinds of steam. The opinion of millions was the terror of the world, and it was attempted either to dissipate them by amusing nations, or to pile it over with strata of society, a layer of soldiers, over that a layer of lords, and a king on top, with clamps and hoops and castles and garrisons and police. But sometimes the religious principle would get out and burst the hoops, and arrive every mountain laid on top of it. The Fultons and Watts of politics, believing in unity, saw that it was a power, and by satisfying it, as justice satisfies everybody, through a different disposition of society, grouping it on a level instead of piling it into a mountain, they have contrived to make of this terror the most harmless and energetic form of state. Very odious, I confess, are the lessons of fate. Who likes to have a dapper phrenologist pronouncing on his fortunes? Who likes to believe that he has hidden in his skull, spine, and pelvis all the vices of Saxon or Celtic race, which will be sure to pull him down, with the grandeur of hope and resolve he has fired, into a selfish, huckstering, servile, dodging animal? A learned physician tells us the fact is invariable with the Neapolitan that, when mature, he assumes the forms of the unmistakable scoundrel. That is a little overstated, but it may pass. But these are magazines and arsenals. A man must thank his defects and stand in some terror at his talents. A transcendent talent draws so largely on his forces as to lame it. Defect pays him revenues on the other side. Sufferance, which is the badge of the Jew, has made him, in these days, the ruler of the rulers of the earth. If fate is ore and quarry, if evil is good and in the making, if limitation is power that shall be, if calamities, oppositions, and ways are wings and means, we are reconciled. Fate involves amelioration. No statement of the universe can have any soundness which does not admit its descending effort. The direction of the whole and of the parts is toward benefit and in proportion to the health. Behind every individual closes organization. Before him open liberty. The better, the best. The first and worst races are dead. The second and perfect races are dying out, or remain for the maturing of higher. In the latest race, in man, every generosity, every new perception, and love and praise he extorts from his fellows are certificates of advance out of fate into freedom. Liberation of the will from the sheaths and clogs of organization which he has outgrown is the end and aim of the world. Every calamity is a spur and valuable hint. Whereas endeavors do not fully avail, they tell his tendency. The whole circle of life, tooth against tooth, devouring war, war for food, a yelp of pain and a grunt of triumph, and at last the whole menagerie, the whole chemical mass is mellowed and refined for higher use. Pleases that is sufficient perspective. But to see how fate slides into freedom, and freedom into fate, observe how far the roots of every man run, or find, if you can, a point where there is no thread of connection. Our life is constantaneous and far related. This knot of nature is so well tied, and nobody has ever had the cunning enough to find the two ends. Nature is intricate, overlapped, interweaved, and endless. Christopher Wren said of the beautiful King's College Chapel that if anybody would tell him where to lay the first stone, he would build another. Where shall we find the first atom in this house of man, which is all constant inoculation and balance of parts? The web of relation is shown in habitat, shown in hibernation. When hibernation was observed, it was found that, while some animals become torpid in winter, others were torpid in summer. Hibernation then was a false name. The long sleep is not an effect of cold, but is regulated by the supply of proper food for the animal. It becomes torpid when the fruit or prey it lives on is not in season, and regains its activity when its food is ready. Eyes are found in light, ears in auricular air, feet on land, fins in water, wings in air, and each creature where it was meant to be, with mutual fitness. Every zone has its own fauna. There is adjustment between the animal and its food, its parasite, its enemy. Balances are kept. It is not allowed to diminish in numbers, nor to exceed. The like adjustments exist for man. His food is cooked when he arrived, his coal in the pit, the house ventilated, the mud of the deluge dried. His companions arrived at the same hour, and awaiting him with love, concert, laughter, and tears. These are coarse adjustments, but the invisible are not less. There are more belongings to every creature than his air and his food. His instincts must be met, and he has a predisposing power that bends and fits what is near to him to his use. He is not possible until the invisible things are right for him, as well as the visible. What changes then in sky and earth, and in finer skies and earths, does the appearance of some Dante or Columbus surprise us? How is this effected? Nature is no spendthrift, but takes the shortest way to her ends. As the general says to the soldiers, if you want a fort, build a fort. So nature makes every creature do its own work and get its living. Is it planet, animal, or tree? The planet makes itself. The animal cell makes itself, and what it wants. Every creature, wren or dragon, shall make it its own lair. So soon as there is life, there is self-direction, and absorbing and using of material. Life is freedom, life in the direct ratio of its amount. You may be sure the newborn man is not inert. Life works both voluntary and supernaturally in its neighborhood. Do you suppose he can be assimilated by his weight or pounds, or that he is contained in his skin, this reaching, radiating, ejaculating fellow? The smallest candle fills a mile with its rays, and the papillæ of man runs to every star. When there is something to be done, the world knows how to get it done. The vegetable eye makes leaf, pericarp, root, bark, and thorn, as the need is. The first cell converts itself into stomach, mouth, nose, or nail. According to the want, the world throws its life into a hero or shepherd, and puts him where he is wanted. Dante and Columbus were Italians in their time. They would be Russians or Americans today. Things ripen, new men come. The adaptation is not capricious. The ultimate aim, the purpose beyond itself, the correlation by which planets subside and crystallize, then animate beast animal, will not stop, but will work into finer particulars, and from the finer to the finest. The secret of the world is the tie between person and event. Person makes event, the event person. The times, the age, what is that, but a few profound persons and a few active persons who epitomize the times. Goethe, Hegel, Metternich, Adams, Calhoun, Kazoo, Peel, Cobden, Kossuth, Rothschild, Astor, Brunel, and the rest. The same fitness must be presumed a man in the time and event, as between the sexes, or between a race of animals and the food it eats, or the inferior races it uses. He thinks his fate alien, because the copula is hidden. But the soul contains the event that shall befall it, for the event is only the actualization of its thoughts. What we pray to ourselves for is always granted. The event is a print of your form. It fits you like your skin. What each does is proper to him. Events are the children of the body and mind. We learn of the soul of fate as the soul of us, as if he sings, "Alas, to all I had not known, my guide and fortune's guides are one." All the toys that infatuate men, and which they play for, houses, land, money, luxury, power, fame, are the self-same thing, with a new gauze or two of illusion overlaid. And of the drums and rattles by which men are made willing to have their heads broken, and are led out solemnly every morning to parade, the most admirable is this by which we are brought to believe that events are arbitrary and independent of actions. At the conjurer's we detect the hair by which he moves his puppet, but we have not yet eyes sharp enough to descry the thread that ties cause and event. Nature magically suits the man to his fortune by making these the fruits of his character. Ducks take to the water, eagles to the sky, waiters to the sea margin, hunters to the forest, clerks to the counting room, soldiers to the frontier. Thus events grow on the same stem with persons, our sub-persons. The pleasures of life are according to the man that lives it, and not according to the work of the place. Life is an ecstasy. We know that madness belongs to love. What power to paint a vile object in hues of heaven! As insane persons are indifferent to their dress, diet, or other accommodations, and as we do in dreams, with equanimity, the most absurd act, so the drop more of wine or a cup of life will reconcile us to the strange company and work. Each creature puts forth from itself its own condition and sphere, as the slug sweats its slimy house on the pearl leaf, and the woolly aphids on the apple perspire their own bed, and the fish its shell. In youth we clothe ourselves in rainbows, and go as brave as the zodiac. In age we put on another sort of perspiration, gout, fever, rheumatism, caprice, doubt, fretting, and avarice. A man's fortunes are the fruit of his character. A man's friends are his magnetisms. We go to Herodotus and Plutarch for examples of fate. We are examples. The tendency of every man to enact all that is in his constitution is expressed in the old belief, that the effort by which we make to escape from our destiny only serves to lead us into it. And I have noticed, a man likes better to be complimented on his position as a proof of the lasting total excellence than on his merit. A man will see his character emitted in the events that seem to meet, but which exude from and accompany him. Events expand from the character. As once he found himself among toys, so now he plays a part in the colossal systems, and his growth is declared in his ambition, his companions, in his performance. He looks like a piece of luck, but is a piece of causation, the mosaic angulated and ground to fit into the gap he fills. Hence, in each town there is some man who, in his brains and performance, an explanation of the tillage, production, factories, banks, churches, ways of living, and society of that town. If you do not chance to meet him, all that you see will leave you a bit puzzled. If you see him, it will become plain. We know in Massachusetts who built New Bedford, who built Lynn, Lowell, Lawrence, Clinton, Vicksburg, Holyoke, Portland, and many other noisy mart. Each of these men, if they were transparent, would seem to you not so much as men as walking cities. Wherever you put them, they would build one. History is the action and reaction of these two, nature and thought. Two boys pushing each other on the curbstone of the pavement. Everything is pushed and pusher, and matter and mind are in perpetual tilt and balance so. Whilst the man is weak, the earth takes up him. He plants his brain in affectations. By and by he takes up the earth, and half his garden and vineyards in the beautiful order and production of his thought. Every solid on the earth is ready to become fluid on the approach of the mind, and the power of the flux is in the measure of the mind. If the wall remain adamant, it accuses the want of thought. To a subtler thought, it may stream into new forms, expressive of the character of the mind. What is the city in which we sit here but an aggregate of incongruous materials which have obeyed the will of some man? Granite was reluctant, but his hands were stronger, and it came. Iron was deep in the ground, and well combined with stone, but it could not hide from his fires. Wood, lime, stuffs, fruit, gums were disposed over the earth and sea, in vain. Here they are within reach of every man's day labor, what he wants of them. The whole world is the flux of matter over the wires of thought to the poles of points where it would build. The races of men rise out of the ground, preoccupied with thoughts which rule them, and divided into parties ready armed and angry to fight for this metaphysical abstraction. The quality of the thought differences the Egyptian and the Roman, the Austrian and the American. The men who come on the stage at one period are all found to be related to each other. Certain ideas are in the air. We are all impressionable, we are made of them. All impressionable, but some more than others, and these first express them. This explains the curious contemporaneousness of inventions and discoveries. The truth is in the air, and the most impressionable brain will announce it first, but all will announce it a few minutes later. So women, as most susceptible, are the best index of the coming hour. So the great man, that is, the man most imbued with the spirit of the time, is the impressionable man, by fibre irritable and delicate, like iodine to light. He feels the infinitesimal attractions. His mind is righter than others, because he yields to a current so feeble as can be felt only by a needle delicately poised. The correlation is shown in defects. Euler, in his essay on architecture, taught the building which was fitted accurately to answer its ends would be turned out to be beautiful, though beauty had not been intended. I find the like unity in human structures rather violent and pervasive. That crudity in the blood will appear in the argument. A hump in the shoulder will appear in the speech and the handwork. If this mind could be seen, the hump would be seen. If a man has a seesaw in his voice, it will run into his sentences, into his poem, into the structure of his fable, into his speculation, into his charity. And as every man is hunted by his own daemon, vexed by his own disease, this checks all of activity. So each man, like each plant, has his parasites. A strong, astringent, bilious nature has more truculent enemies than the slugs and moths that fret my leaves. Such a one as curculios, borers, knifeworms. A swindler ate him first, then a client, then a quack, then smooth, plausible gentleman, bitter, selfish as Moloch. This correlation really existing can be divined. If the threads are there, thought can follow and show them, especially when a soul is quick and docile, as Chaucer sings. Or if the soul of proper kind be so perfect as men find, that it wot what is to come, that he warneth all in sum of every of their adventures, by previsions and figures, that our flesh hath not might to understand aright, for it is warned too darkly. Some people are made up of rhyme, coincidence, omen, periodicity, and presage. They meet the person they seek. What their companion prepares to say to them, they first say to him. 100 signs apprise them of what is about to befall. Wonderful intricacy in the web, wonderful constancy in the design this vagabond life admits. We wonder how the fly finds its mate, and yet year after year we find 2 men, 2 women, without legal or carnal right, spend a great part of their best time together within a few feet of each other. And the moral is that what we seek we shall find. What we flee from flees from us. As Goethe said, what we wish for in youth comes to us in heaps in old age, too often cursed with the granting of our prayer, and hence the high caution that since we are sure of having what we wish, we beware of only wishing for high things. One key, one solution to the mysteries of human condition, one solution to the old knots of fate, freedom of foreknowledge, exists, the propounding, namely, of the double consciousness. Man must ride alternately on the horses of his private and his public nature, as the equestrians of the circus throw themselves nimbly from horse to horse, or plant one foot on the back of one and the other foot on the back of the other. So when man is victim of his fate, his sciatica in his loins, the cramp in his mind, a clubfoot and a club in his wit, a sour wit and a selfish temper, a strut in his gait and a conceit in his affectation, or is ground to powder by the vice of his race, he is to rally on his relation to the universe, which his ruin benefits. Leaving the daemon who suffers, he is to take sides with the deity who secures universal benefit by his pain. To offset the drag of temperament and race which pulls down, learn this lesson, namely, that by the cunning co-presence of 2 elements, which is throughout nature, whatever lames or paralyzes you, draws in with it the divinity of some form to repay. A good intention clothes itself with sudden power. When a god wishes to ride, any chip or pebble will bud and shoot out winged feet and serve him for a horse. Let us build altars to blessed unity, which holds nature and souls in perfect solution, and compels every atom to serve an universal end. Or not wonder at the snowflake, a shell, a summer landscape, or the glory of the stars, but at the necessity of beauty under which the universe lies. That all is and must be pictorial, that the rainbow, and the curve of the horizon, and the arc of the blue vault are only results from the organism of the eye. There is no need for foolish amateurs to fetch me to admire a garden of flowers, or a sun-gilt cloud, or waterfall, when I cannot look without seeing splendor and grace. How idle to choose a random sparkle here or there, when the indwelling necessity plants the rose of beauty on the brow of chaos, and discloses the central intention of nature to be harmony and joy. Let us build altars to the beautiful necessity. If we thought men were free in the sense that, in a single exception, one fantastical will could prevail over the law of things, it were all one as if a child's hand could pull down the sun. If in the least particular one could derange the order of nature, who would accept the gift of life? Let us build altars to the beautiful necessity, which secures that all is made of one piece, that plaintiff and defendant, friend and enemy, animal and planet, food and eater are of one kind. In astronomy is vast space, but no foreign system. In geology, vast time, but the same laws as today. Why should we be afraid of nature, which is no other than philosophy and theology embodied? Why should we fear to be crushed by savage elements, we who are made up of the same elements? Let us build to the beautiful necessity, which makes men brave in believing that he cannot shun a danger that is appointed, nor incur one that is not, to the necessity which rudely or softly educates them to the perception that there are no contingencies, that law rules throughout existence, a law which is not intelligent but intelligence, not personal nor impersonal. It disdains words and passes understanding, it dissolves persons, it vivifies nature, it solicits the pure in heart to draw on all its omnipotence.
End of Fate.
Essay 2 of Conduct of Life by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Power.
His tongue was framed to music, and his hand was armed with skill. His face was the mold of beauty, and his heart the throne of will. There is not yet any inventory of a man's faculties, any more than a Bible of his opinions. Who shall set a limit to the influence of a human being? There are men who, by their sympathetic attractions, carry nations with them, and lead the activity of the human race. If there be such a tie that, whether the mind of man goes, nature will accompany him, perhaps there are men whose magnetisms are of that force to draw material and elemental powers, and, where they appear, immense instrumentalities organize around them. Life is a search after power. And this is an element with which the world is so saturated, there is no chink or crevice in which it is not lodged, that no honest seeking goes unrewarded. A man should prize events and possessions as the ore in which his fine mineral is found, and he can well afford to let events and possessions and the breath of the body go, if their value has been added to him in the shape of power. If he have secured the elixir, he can spare the wide gardens from which it was distilled. A cultivated man, wise to know and bold to perform, is the end to which nature works, and the education of the will is a flowering result of all this geology and astronomy. All successful men have agreed on one thing. They were causationalists. They believed that things went not by luck, but by law, that there was not a weak or a cracked link in the chain that joins the first and the last of things. A belief in causality, or strict connection between every trifle and the principles of being, and, in consequence, belief in compensation or that nothing is got for nothing, characterizes all valuable minds, and must control every effort that is made by an industrious one. The most valiant men are the best believers in the tensions of the laws. All the great captains, said Bonaparte, have performed vast achievements by conforming with the rules of the art, by adjusting efforts to obstacles. The key to the age may be this or that or the other, as the young orators describe. The key to all ages is imbecility. Imbecility in the vast majority of men at all times, and even in heroes, in all but certain eminent moments. Victims of gravity, customs, and fear. This gives strength to the strong, that the multitude have no habit of self-reliance or original action. We must reckon success a constitutional trait. Courage, the old physicians taught, and their meaning holds if their physiology is a little mythical. Courage, or the degree of life, is the degree of circulation of the blood in the arteries. During passion, anger, fury, trials of strength, wrestling, fighting, a large amount of blood is collected in the arteries, the maintenance of bodily strength requiring it, and but little is sent into the veins. This condition is constant with intrepid persons. Where the arteries hold their blood is courage and adventure possible. Where they pour it unrestrained into the veins, the spirit is low and feeble. For performance of great mark it needs extraordinary health. If Eric is in robust health, and has slept well, and is at the top of his condition, and 30 years old, at his departure from Greenland he will steer west, and his ships will reach Newfoundland. But take out Eric, and put in a stronger and bolder man, Bjorn or Thornfinn, and the ships will, with just as much ease, sail 600, 1,000, 1,500 miles further, and reach Labrador and New England. There is no chance in results. With adults, as with children, one class enter cordially into the game, and whirl with the whirling world, and others have cold hands and remain bystanders, or are only dragged in by the humor and vivacity of those who can carry a dead weight. The first wealth is health. Sickness is poor-spirited and cannot serve anyone. It must husband its resources to live. But health in fullness answers its own ends, and has to spare, runs over, and inundates the neighborhoods and creeks of other men's necessities. All power is of one kind, a sharing of the nature of the world. The mind that is parallel with the laws of nature will be in the current of events, and strong with their strength. One man is made of the same stuff of which the events are made, is in sympathy with the course of things, can predict it. Whatever befalls, befalls him first, so that he is equal to whatever shall happen. A man who knows men can talk well on politics, trade, law, war, religion, for everywhere men are led in the same manners. The advantage of a strong pulse is not to be supplied by any labor, art, or concert. It is like the climate, which easily rears a crop, which no glass, or irrigation, or tillage, or manures can elsewhere rival. It is like the opportunity of a city like New York or Constantinople, which needs no diplomacy to force capital or genius to labor to it. They come of themselves as the waters flow to it. So a broad, healthy, massive understanding seems to lie on the shore of unseen rivers, of unseen oceans, which are covered with barks, that night and day are drifted to this point. That is poured into its laps which other men lie plotting for, It is in everybody's secret, anticipates everybody's discovery, and if it do not command every fact of the genius and the scholar, it is because it is large and sluggish, and does not think them worth the exertion which you do. This affirmative force is in one, and is not in another, as one horse has a spring in him and another in the whip. On the neck of the young man, says Hafiz, sparkles no gem so gracious as enterprise. And pour it into any stationary district, as into an old Dutch population in New York or Pennsylvania, or among the planters of Virginia, a colony of hardy Yankees, with seething brains, heads full of steam hammers, pulley, crank, and toothed wheel, and everything will begin to shine with values. What enhancement to all the water on land in England is the arrival of James Watt or Brunel. In every company there is not only the active and passive sex, but in both men and women a deeper and more important sex of mind, namely the inventive or creative class of both men and women, and the uninventive or accepting class. Each plus man represents his set, and if he have the accidental advantage of personal ascendancy, which implies neither more nor less of talent, but merely the temperamental or taming eye of the soldier or schoolmaster, which one has and one has not, as one has a black mustache and one a blonde, then quite easily and without envy or resistance all his coadjutors and feeders will admit his right to absorb them. The merchant works by bookkeeper and cashier, the lawyer's authorities are hunted up by clerks, the geologist reports the surveys of his subalterns, Commander Wilkes appropriates the results of all the naturalists attached to his expedition. Thorwaldsen's statue is finished by stonecutters, Dumas has journeymen, and Shakespeare was a theater manager, and used the labor of many young men, as well as the playbooks. There is always room for a man of force, and he makes room for many. Society is a troop of thinkers, and the best heads among them take the best places. A feeble man can see the farms that are fenced and tilled, the houses that are built. The strong man sees the possible houses and farms. His eye makes estates, as fast as the sun breeds clouds. When a new boy comes into school, when a man travels and encounters strangers every day, or when into any old club a newcomer is domesticated, that happens which befalls when a strange ox is driven into a pen or pasture where cattle are kept. There is at once a trial of strength between the best pair of horns and the newcomer, and it is settled thenceforth which is the leader. So now there is a measuring of strength, very courteous but decisive, and an acquiescence thenceforth when the two meet. Each reads his fate in the other's eyes. The weaker party finds that none of his information or wit quite fits this occasion. He thought he knew this or that. He finds that he omitted to learn the end of it. Nothing that he knows will quite hit the mark, whilst all the rival's arrows are good and well thrown. But if he knows all the facts in the encyclopedia, it would not help him, for this is an affair of presence of mind, of attitude, of aplomb. The opponent has the sun and the wind, and every cast the choice of weapon and mark, and when he himself is matched with some other antagonist, his own shafts fly well and hit. 'Tis a question of stomach and constitution. The second man is as good as the first, perhaps better, but has not the stoutness of stomach as the first has, and so his wit seems overfine and underfine. Health is good, power, life that resists disease, poison all enemies, and is conservative as well as creative. Here is question, every spring, whether to graft with wax or whether with clay, whether to whitewash or potash, or to prune, but the one point is a thrifty tree. A good tree, that agrees with the soil, will grow in spite of blight, or bug, or pruning, or neglect, by night and by day, in all weathers and all treatments. Vivacity, leadership, must be had, and we are not allowed to be nice in choosing. We must fetch the pump with dirty water, if clean cannot be had. If we will make bread, we must have contagion, yeast, emptyings, or what not, to induce fermentation into the dough, as the torpid artist seeks inspiration at any cost, by virtue or by vice, by friend or by fiend, by prayer or by wine. And we have a certain instinct that where is great amount of life, though gross and peccant, it has its own checks and purifications, and will be found at last in harmony with moral laws. We watch in children with pathetic interest the degree in which they possess the recuperative force. When they are hurt by us or by each other, or go to the bottom of the class, or miss the annual prize, or are beaten in the game, if they lose heart, remember the mischance in their chamber at home, they have a serious check. But if they have the buoyancy and resistance that preoccupies them with new interests in the new moment, the wound cicatrize, and the fibre is the tougher for the hurt. One comes to value this plus health when he sees that all difficulties vanish before it. A timid man listening to the alarmists at Congress and in the newspapers, and observing the profligacy of party, sectional interests urged with a fury which shuts its eyes to consequences, with a mind made up to desperate extremities, ballot of one hand and rifle in the other, might easily believe that he and his country have seen their best days, and he hardens himself the best he can against the coming ruin. But after this has been foretold with equal confidence 50 times, and government 6% have not declined a quarter of a mill, he discovers that the enormous elements of strength which are here in play make our politics unimportant. Personal power, freedom, and the resources of nature strain every faculty of every citizen. We prosper with such vigor that, like thrifty trees which grow in spite of ice, lice, mice, and borers, so we do not suffer from the profligate swarms that fatten on the national treasury. The huge animals nourish huge parasites, and the rancor of the disease attests the strength of the constitution. The same energy in the Greek demos drew the remark that the evils of the popular government appear greater than they are. There is compensation for them in spirit and energy it awakens. The rough and ready style which belongs to a people, of sailors, foresters, farmers, and mechanics, has its advantages. Power educates the potentate. As long as our people quote English standards, they dwarf their own proportions. A Western lawyer of eminence said to me he wished it were a penal offense to bring an English law book into a court in this country, so pernicious had he found in his experience our deference to English precedent. The very commerce has only an English meaning, and is pinched to the cramped exigencies of English experience. The commerce of rivers, the commerce of railroads, and who knows but the commerce of air balloons, must add an American extension to the pond hole of admiralty. As long as our people quote English standards, they will miss the sovereignty of power. But let these rough riders, legislators in shirt sleeves, Hoosier, Sucker, Wolverine, Badger, or whatever hardhead Arkansas, Oregon, or Utah sends, half orator, half assassin, to represent its wrath and cupidity at Washington. Let these drive as they may, and the disposition of territories and public lands, the necessity of balancing and keeping at bay the snarling majorities of German, Irish, and of native millions, will bestow promptness, address, and reason at last on our buffalo hunter, and authority and majesty of manners. The instinct of the people is right. Men expect from good Whigs, put into office by the respectability of the country, much less skill to deal with Mexico, Spain, Britain, or with our own malcontent members, than with some strong transgressor like Jefferson or Jackson, who first conquers his own government, and then uses the same genius to conquer the foreigner. The senators who descended from Mr. Polk's Mexican War were not those who knew better, but those who, from political position, could afford it, not Webster, but Benton and Calhoun. This power, to be sure, is not clothed in satin. It is the power of lynch law, of soldiers and pirates, and it bullies the peaceable and loyal. But it brings its own antidote, and here is my point, that all kinds of power usually emerge at the same time, good energy and bad, power of mind with physical health, the ecstasies of devotion with the exasperations of debauchery. The same elements are always present, only sometimes these conspicuous and sometimes those. What was yesterday foreground being today background. What was surface, playing now a not less effective part as basis. The longer the drought lasts, the more is the atmosphere surcharged with water. The faster the ball falls to the sun, the force to fly off is by so much augmented, and in morals, wild liberty breeds iron conscience. Natures with great impulses have great resources, and return from far. In politics, the sons of Democrats will be Whigs, whilst red republicanism in the father is a spasm of nature to engender an intolerable tyrant in the next age. On the other hand, conservatism, ever more timorous and narrow, disgusts the children and drives them for a mouthful of fresh air into radicalism. Those who have most of this coarse energy, the bruisers, who have run the gauntlet of caucus and tavern through this country and the state, have their own vices, but they have good nature of strength and courage. Fierce and unscrupulous, they are usually frank and direct, and above falsehood. Our politics falls into bad hands, and churchmen and men of refinement, it seems agreed, are not fit persons to send to Congress. Politics is a deleterious profession, like some poisonous handicrafts. Men in power have no opinions, but may be cheap for any opinion, for any purpose, and if it be a question between the most civil and the most forcible, I lean to the last. These Hoosiers and Suckers are really better than the sniveling opposition. Their wrath is at least as bold and manly cast. They see, against the unanimous declarations of the people, how much crime the people will bear. They proceed from step to step, and they have calculated but too justly upon their excellencies, the New England governors, and upon the honors, the New England legislators. The message of the governors and the resolutions of the legislators are a proverb for expressing a sham virtuous indignation, which, in the course of events, is sure to be belied. In trade, also, this energy usually carries a trace of ferocity. Philanthropic or religious bodies do not commonly make their executive officers out of saints. The communities hitherto founded by socialists, the Jesuits, the party royalists, the American communities of New Harmony, of Brook Farm, of Zor, are only possible by installing Judas as steward. The rest of the offices may be filled by good burgesses. The pious and charitable proprietor has a foreman not quite so pious and charitable. The most amiable of country gentlemen has a certain pleasure in the teeth of the bulldog which guards his orchard. Of the Shaker Society, it was formerly a sort of proverb in the country that they always sent the devil to market, and in representations of the deity, painting, poetry, and popular religion have ever drawn from the wrath of hell. It is an esoteric doctrine of society that a little wickedness is good to make muscle, as if conscience were not good for hands and legs, as if poor decayed formalists of law and order cannot run like wild goats, wolves, and conies. That is, there is a use in medicine for poisons, so the world cannot move without rogues. That public spirit and the ready hand are as well found among the malignants. It is not very rare, the coincidence of sharp private and political practice, with public spirit and good neighborhood. I knew a burly Boniface, who for many years kept a public house in one of the rural capitals. He was a knave whom the town could ill spare. He was a social, vascular creature, grasping and selfish. There was no crime which he did not or could not commit, but he made good friends of the selectmen, served them with his best chop when they supped at his house, and also with his honor the judge. He was very cordial, grasping his hand. He introduced all the friends, male and female, into the town, and united in his person the functions of bully, incendiary, swindler, barkeeper, and burglar. He girdled the trees and cut off the horses' tails of the temperance people in the night. He led the rummies and radicals in town meetings with a speech. Meantime he was civil, fat, and easy in his house, and precisely the most public-spirited citizen. He was active in getting the roads repaired and planted with shade trees. He subscribed for the fountains, the gas, and the telegraph. He introduced the new horse rake, the new scraper, the baby jumper, and what not, that Connecticut sends to the admiring citizens. He did this the easier, that the peddler stopped at his house and paid his keeping. Whilst thus the energy for originating and executing work deforms itself by excess, and so our axe chaps off our own fingers, this evil is not without remedy. All the elements whose aid man calls on will sometimes become his masters, especially those of most subtle force. Shall he then renounce steam, fire, and electricity, or shall he learn to deal with them? The rule for this class of agencies is, all plus is good, only put in the right place. Men of the surcharge of arterial blood cannot live on nuts, herb teas, and elegies, cannot read novels and play whist, cannot satisfy all their wants at the Thursday lecture or the Boston Athenaeum. They pine for adventure, and must go to Pike's Peak, had rather die at the hatchet of a Pawnee than sit all day every day at a counting-room desk. They are made for war, for the sea, for mining, hunting, and clearing, for hair-breadth adventure, huge risks, and the joy of eventful living. Some men cannot endure an hour of calm at sea. I remember a poor Malay cook on board at Liverpool packet, who, when the wind blew a gale, could not contain his joy. "Blow," he cried, "me do tell you, blow." Their friends and governors must see that some vent for their explosive complexion is provided. The roysters who are destined for infamy at home, if sent to Mexico, will cover you with glory, and come back heroes and generals. There are Oregons, Californias, and exploring expeditions enough pertaining to America, to find them in fowl to gnaw, and in crocodiles to eat. The young English are fine animals, full of blood, and when they have no wars to breathe, their riotous valors and they seek for travelers as dangerous as war, diving into maelstroms, swimming in hellesponts, wading up the snowy Himalaya, hunting lion, rhinoceros, elephant in South Africa, gypsying with burro in Spain and Algiers, riding alligators in South America with Waterton, utilizing Bedouin, Sheik, and Paca with Layard, yachting amongst the icebergs of Lancaster Sound, peeping into craters on the equator, or running on the creases of Malays and Borneo. The excess of virility has the same importance in general history as in private and industrious life. Strong race or strong individuals rest at last on natural forces, which are best in the savage, who like the beasts around him is still in reception of the milk from the teats of nature. Cut off the connection between any of our works and this aboriginal source, and the work is shallow. The people lean on this, and the mob is not quite so bad an argument as some people say, for it has this good side. "March without the people," said a French deputy from the Tribune, and you march into night. Their instincts are a finger pointing at Providence, always turning toward real benefit. But when you espouse an Orleans party, or a Bourbon, or a Montalembert party, or any other but an organic party, though you mean well, you have a personality instead of a principle, which will inevitably drag you into a corner. The best antidotes of this force are to be had from savage life, in explorers, soldiers, and buccaneers. But who cares for the falling outs of assassins, and fights of bears, and grindings of icebergs? Physical force has no value where there is nothing else. Snow and snowbanks, fire and volcanoes, and solfataras is cheap. The luxury of ice is in tropical countries, and midsummer days. The luxury of fire is to have a little on our hearth, and electricity, not volleys of charged cloud, but the manageable stream of the battery wires. So of spirit or energy. The rest or remains of it in the civil and moral man are worth all the cannibals in the Pacific. In history, the great moment is when the savage is just ceasing to be a savage, with all his hairy pelagic strength directed in the opening sense of beauty, and you have a Pericles or a Phidias, not yet passed over into the Corinthian civility. Everything good in nature and the world is in that moment of transition, and when the swarthy juices still flow plentifully from nature, but their astringency or acidity is got out by ethics and humanity. The triumphs of peace have been in some proximity to war, whilst the hand was still familiar with the sword hilt, whilst the habits of the camp were still visible in the port and complexion of the gentleman, his intellectual power culminated. The compression and tension of these stern conditions is a training for the finest and softest arts, and can rarely be compensated in tranquil times, except for some analogous vigor drawn from occupations as hardy as war. We say that success is constitutional, depends on a plus condition of mind and body, on power of work, on courage, that it is a main efficacy in carrying on the world, and, though rarely found in the right state for an article of commerce, but oftener in the supersaturate or excess, which makes it a dangerous and destructive, yet it cannot be spared, and must be had in that form, and absorbents provided to take off its edge. The affirmative class monopolize the homage of mankind. They originate and execute all the great feats. What a force was coiled up in the skull of Napoleon! Of the 60,000 men making his army élu, it seems some 30,000 were thieves and burglars. The men whom, in peaceful communities, we hold if we can, with iron at their legs, in prisons, under the muskets of sentinels, this man dealt with, hand to hand, dragged them to their duty, and won his victories by their bayonets. This aboriginal might give us a surprising pleasure when it appears under conditions of supreme refinement, as in the proficience of high art. When Michelangelo was forced to paint the Sistine Chapel in fresco, of which art he knew nothing, he went down to the Pope's garden behind the Vatican, and with a shovel dug out ochres, red and yellow, and mixed them with glue and water with his own hands, and having after many trials at last suited himself, climbed his ladders and painted away, week after week, month after month, the Sibyls and Prophets. He surpassed his successors in rough vigor, as much as in purity of intellect and refinement. He was not crushed by his one picture left unfinished at last. Michael was wont to draw his figures first in skeleton, then to clothe them with flesh, and lastly to drape them. Ah, said a brave painter to me, thinking on these things, if a man has failed, you will find he has dreamed instead of working. There are no ways to success in our art but to take off your coat, grind paint, and work like a digger on the railroad, all day, every day. Success goes thus invariably with a certain plus or positive power. An ounce of power must balance an ounce of weight. And though a man cannot return into his mother's womb and be born in with a new amount of vivacity, yet there are two economies which are the best secundia which the case admits. The first is the stopping off decisively of our miscellaneous activity, and concentrating our force on one or a few points, as a gardener, by severe pruning, forces the sap of the tree into one or two vigorous limbs, instead of suffering it to spindle into a sheaf of twigs. Enlarge not thy destiny, said the oracle. Endeavor not to do more than is given thee in charge. The one prudence in life is concentration, the one evil is dissipation, and it makes no difference whether our dissipations are coarse or fine, property and its cares, friends and a social habit or politics, or music or feasting. Everything is good which takes away one plaything and delusion more, and drives us home to add one stroke of faithful work. Friends, books, pictures, lower duties, talents, flatteries, hopes, all are distractions which cause oscillations in our giddy balloon, and make a good poise in a straight course impossible. You must elect your work. You shall take what your brain can, and drop off all the rest. Only so can that amount of vital force accumulate, which can make the step from knowing to doing. No matter how much faculty of idle seeing a man has, the step from knowing to doing is rarely taken. It is a step out of the chalk circle of imbecility into fruitfulness. Many an artist lacking this lacks all. He sees the masculine Angelo or Cellini with despair. He too is up to nature in the first cause in his thought, but the spasm to collect and swing his whole being into one act he has not. The poet Campbell said, a man accustomed to work was equal to any achievement he resolved on, and that for himself necessity, not inspiration, was the prompter of his muse. Concentration is a secret of strength in politics and war, in trade, in short, in all management of human affairs. One of the high anecdotes of the world is the reply of Newton to the inquiry how he had been able to achieve his discoveries, by always intending my mind. Or if you have a text from politics, take this from Plutarch. There was in the whole city but one street in which Pericles was ever seen, the street which led to the market-place and the council-house. He declined all invitations to banquets, and all gay assemblies and company. During the whole period of his administration he never dined at the table of a friend. Or if we see an example from trade, I hope, said a good man to Rothschild, your children are not too fond of money and business. I am sure you would not wish that. I am sure I would wish that. I wish them to give mind, soul, heart, and body to business. That is the way to be happy. It requires a great deal of boldness and a great deal of caution to make a great fortune, and when you have got it, it requires 10 times as much wit to keep it. If I were to listen to all the projects proposed to me, I should ruin myself very soon. Stick to one business, young man. Stick to your brewery. He said this to a young Buxton. And you will be the great brewer of London. Be brewer and banker and merchant and manufacturer, and you will soon be in the Gazette. Many men are knowing, many are apprehensive and tenacious, but they do not rush to a decision. But in our flowing affairs a decision must be made. The best if you can, but any is better than none. There are 20 ways of going to a point, and one is the shortest, but set out at once on one. A man who has the presence of mind which can bring to him on the instant all he knows, is worth for action a dozen men who know as much, but can only bring it to light slowly. The good speaker in the House is not the man who knows the theory of parliamentary tactics, but the man who decides offhand. The good judge is not he who does hair-splitting justice to every allegation, but who, aiming at substantial justice, rules something intelligible for the guidance of suitors. The good lawyer is not the man who has an eye to every side and angle of contingency, but qualifies all his qualifications, but he who throws himself on your part so heartily that he can get you out of a scrape. Dr. Johnson said in one of his flowing sentences, "Miserable beyond all names of wretchedness is that unhappy pair who are doomed to reduce beforehand to the principles of abstract reason all the details of each domestic day. There are cases where little can be said, and much must be done." The second substitute for temperament is drill. The power of use and routine. The hack is a better roadster than the Arab barb. In chemistry, the galvanic stream, slow and continuous, is equal in power to the electric spark, and is, in our arts, a better agent. So in human action, against a spasm of energy, we offset the continuity of drill. We spread the same amount of force over much time, instead of condensing it into a moment. 'Tis the same ounce of gold here in the ball, and there in the leaf. At West Point, Colonel Buford, the chief engineer, pounded with a hammer on the trunnions of a cannon until he broke them off. He fired a piece of ordnance some 100 times in swift succession until it burst. Now which stroke broke the trunnion? Every stroke. Which blast burst the piece? Every blast. Diligence passe sens, Henry VIII was wont to say, or great as drill. John Kemble said that the worst provincial company of actors could go through a play better than the best amateur company. Basil Hall likes to show that the worst regular troops will beat the best volunteers. Practice is 9/10. A course of mobs is good practice for orators. All the great speakers were bad speakers at first. Stepping it through England for 7 years made Cobden a consummate debater. Stepping it through New England for twice 7 trained Wendell Phillips. The way to learn German is to read the same dozen pages over and over 100 times, so you know every word and particle in them, and can pronounce and repeat them by heart. No genius can recite a ballad at first reading, so well as mediocrity can at the 15th or 20th reading. The rule for hospitality and Irish help is to have the same dinner every day throughout the year. At last, Mrs. O'Shaughnessy learns to cook it to a nicety, and the host learns to carve it, and the guests are well served. A humorous friend of mine thinks that the reason why nature is so perfect in her arts, and gets up such inconceivably fine sunsets, is that she had learned how, at last, by dint of doing the same thing for very often. Cannot one converse better on a topic in which one has experience than on one which is new? Men whose opinion is valued on change are only such as have a special experience, and off that ground their opinion is not valuable. More are made good by exercitation than by nature, said Democritus. The friction in nature is so enormous that we cannot spare any power. It is not a question to express our thought, to elect our way, but to overcome resistances to the medium and material in everything we do. Hence the use of drill, and the worthlessness of amateurs to cope with practitioners. 6 hours every day at the piano, only to give facility of touch. 6 hours a day at painting, only to give command to the odious materials, oil, ochres, and brushes. The masters say that they know a master in music only by seeing the pose of his hand on the keys. So difficult and vital an act is the command of the instrument. To have learned to use the tools by thousands of manipulations, to have learned the arts of reckoning by endless adding and dividing, is the power of the mechanic and the clerk. I remarked in England, in the confirmation of a frequent experience at home, that, in literary circles, the men of trust and consideration, bookmakers, editors, university deans, and professors, bishops too, were by no means of the largest literary talent, but usually of low and ordinary intellectuality, with a sort of mercantile activity and working talent. Indifferent hacks and mediocrities tower, by pushing their forces to a lucrative point, or by working power over multitudes of superior men, in Old as in New England. I have not forgotten that there are sublime considerations which will limit the value of talent and superficial success. We can easily overpraise the vulgar hero. There are sources in which we have yet not drawn. I know what I abstain from. I adjourn what I have to say on this topic to the chapters on culture and worship. But this force or spirit, by the means relied on by nature for bringing a work of the day about, as far as we attach importance to a household life and the prizes of the world, we must respect that. And I hold that an economy may be applied to it. It is much a subject of exact law and arithmetic as fluids and gases are. It may be husbanded or wasted. Every man is efficient only as he is a container or vessel of this force, and never was any signal act or achievement in history but by this expenditure. This is not gold, but the gold maker, not the fame, but the exploit. If these forces in this husbandry are within reach of our will, and the laws of them can be read, we infer that all success and all conceivable benefits for man is also, first or last, within his reach, and has its own sublime economies by which it may be attained. The world is mathematical and has no casualty, in all its vast and flowing curve. Success has no more eccentricity than the gingham or muslin we weave in our wills. I know no more affecting lesson to our busy, plodding New England brains than to go into one of the factories with which we line the watercourses in the States. A man hardly knows how much he is a machine until he begins to make telegraph, loom, press, and locomotive in his own image. But in these he is forced to leave out his follies and hindrances, so that when we go to the mill, the machine is more moral than we. Let a man dare go to the loom, and see if he be equal to it. Let machine confront machine, and see how they come out. The world mill is more complex than the calico mill, and the architect less stooped. The world mill is more complex than the calico mill, and the architect stooped less. And the gingham mill, a broken thread or a shred spoils the web through a piece of 100 yards, and is traced back to the girl that wove it, and lessens her wages. The stockholder, on being shown this, rubs his hand with delight. Are you so cunning, Mr. Profit-Loss, and do you expect to swindle your master-employer in the web you weave? A day is a more magnificent cloth than a muslin. The mechanism that makes it is infinitely cunninger, and you shall not conceal the sleazy, fraudulent, rotten hours you have slipped into the piece, nor fear that any honest thread, or straighter steel, or an inflexible shaft will not testify in the web.
End of Power.